I'm going to take the clamps to hold the engine wiring harness in and take the one screw out down there, see if we can't get this wiring harness out. Well, that's the only two-pronger on that relay. We had to label the other two because there's two individual plugs. Let's try to get them back in the same place.
I think this has to be pried back.
There we go. Alright.
So this is just for headlights?
Yep. This is a complete mess here. There it is. It'll be easy to work on like that though.
Right.
The first order of business is going to be getting 12 volts to this. I believe we're reading a little less. I do have a couple factory service manuals. Black pink, I don't know, PR stands for primary. That feeds the coil. This one here is saying 1.8. They show an 8 and a 6 cylinder there. This drawing the 72 says 1.8 ohms. Then on a different bodied car, it has like 132 ohms. I think I've seen 180 ohms somewhere. So I don't know what to believe for the resistance here. But looking at the position in this connector, black with pink writing, resistance, do not cut. As I'm undoing this harness, I'm just throwing some tape on here so I know where these wires are supposed to come up out of it. Getting over here and I'm looking at this connector. Nothing was plugged into this, and I'm not sure, but I think this was for the early TCS system. And here's a solenoid that controls vacuum that was found on the car. That black-pink resistance wire is going into this deal. Continue unwrapping. The resistance wire doubled back and went right to where they made their connection here for the makeshift HEI distributor. Kind of nice, they had the wherewithal not to actually cut the harness. Alright, a little research, and I've determined that this wire here, this black with that pink writing, is a resistance wire of a certain length. Apparently the resistance goes by a foot, so a certain length to get the voltage you want at that coil with the car running. Taking a look at the other end, you see this yellow wire here. That went to the R terminal on the starter. So when you're starting the car, that coil would get a nice hot shot at 12 volts. Here's the starter we're going to use. This one does not have that R terminal on it. I'm using one of these mini starters to make it easy to work on with headers. So I'm going to eliminate this R wire without cutting it, and this resistance wire back to this bulkhead connector. I just had to push the one side in and then dig out the gum around it, and it's coming right out. I'm going to reuse this pin with a regular wire that's not a resistance wire. And I'll save the old wires. If someone ever wants to go back to this configuration with points, they're more than welcome to. Might be pretty tough to open this up. I got the wire out without breaking it. It's one heck of a crimp GM put on there. I pulled the wire free of the harness. So I can get an estimate of how long of a replacement wire I got to put in there. Check out this crimp that was on there. I got this clip from Summit, and this is the gauge wire I'll run for the positive. The other one's for the tack terminal. The tack terminal is a separate wire on these cars with an inline fuse. This is what they had for an end, so that'll really clean up that appearance. We got our end all soldered on there, a little bit of heat shrink. Try to get this plugged back in with a nice positive click. Spread the end of this clip out a little bit so it's locked in there. It's in there good and tight. I think that's going to work. The old wire came out of the harness right about here. So I'm just leaving my new wire along, and I'll trim it after the engine's in the car so I can get a perfect fit with that connector. I'm going to work this other wire out now that goes to the R terminal on the starter. It could definitely be reinstalled if somebody really wanted to. I think I read on the blog that this stuff doesn't like the solder, but maybe silver solder would work. I don't know, might have to use a brand new crimp connector on it if it were to be reinstalled. Just for interest, I'm going to take an ohm reading on my new distributor power wire versus the old one. The new one I got 0.3, 0.2. And on the old one I got 1.8, 1.7. Looks like that 1.8 was accurate. I'm going to clean all the jipe off these wires and tape it up and start working backwards now. I'll probably use some of this corrugated stuff when all is said and done, just to protect the wires better than just having tape on there. I'm going to solder this end on also. Solder all connections. Liking that a lot better. A lot of connections in this harness, like this one. They had like a cloth wrap over them. This stuff's just crumbling. So I can't heat shrink it. I'm just putting some electrical tape over it and then tuck it into the harness. It won't be seen. I just realized that these two wires here are fusible links. Got like a major junction point here. And I feel compelled to do something about this. This wire is only holding on by a couple strands. I think I'm just going to try to solder it to the outside of that connector. I believe the black-red here goes to the ignition switch. And the red-black goes to the headlamp connector. The nice thing about doing these videos is I'll know where to find this stuff years down the road when I forget where all this stuff is. Before I fix this guy, I had a loose wire here. And I didn't think it went to here because it's too long for that. I found that it went to this 2-position plug. The other side of this plug is a black and a fat orange stripe. That goes in the back of the alternator along with the other fat positive one. And I couldn't find that black, orange, or that brown on this schematic, but I did find it on the AC wiring schematic. Boy, I hope this stuff isn't too boring for you guys. So here's the 2-position plug. The black-orange is supposed to have a 30 amp inline fuse between the alternator and that plug. And that's mainly powering the blower, it looks like. Here's a blower relay and all kinds of stuff going on there. But this brown one was the one of concern, and tracing it back, there's supposed to be a thermal limiter. And then it goes on to the compressor clutch. And if you recall, the compressor was on all the time it was plugged in this car. Instead of having that clutch hooked up to the correct wire, they got it hooked up to this yellow job that's basically on when the key's on. So whenever the key's on, that compressor clutch is getting power. So here's the plug that goes in the compressor clutch. Seen better days. But that fatty yellow there was on. Then it looks like they spliced in a wire here, red-black. It's doubled back. And then when this would close, that clutch would turn on. This just went to ground. And it looks to me like this yellow wire is meant for all that emission stuff on the car. In another area, they ran into that electric carb choke. I can live with this. I can't live with this though. So when I get the reproduction harness, we'll try to straighten up this AC and get it hooked back up the way it once was. I think for the time being, I'm just going to eliminate this. It's at the end of the season anyway. I believe it's an 8-week lead time to get the new harness anyhow. My suspicions are confirmed here. Here's where they spliced this yellow wire, and they spliced in this other chunk of wire. Part of the reason I just cut this out is because they took the time to splice in a wire that had bad insulation on it. Seen a dark blue one here. See if I can figure out what that is supposed to be for. Busted out another manual to figure this one out. It's an old Chilton repair manual. I actually collect automotive repair manuals. And we got the emission control system. Here we see a time delay relay. We've got a yellow going to it. See, it's a keyed ignition source. Black with a white stripe and a blue. The other end of the blue looks like it goes to an EGR vacuum solenoid. But tracing this guy comes up through here to here. Black, white stripe, blue, and believe it or not, yellow. Been painted once or twice. So I'm going to fold this one back and the yellow one back after I clip this mess off of it until I get around to repairing this properly. I'm over here trying to button up this end of it, and this is the switch that goes to the transmission. There it is. It's a 2-prong switch. One side of it's black-orange. That's going to that pin there in the bulkhead connector, which ultimately goes to the downshift switch. The other end of the steel is straight black, and it goes to a 2-pin connector with a black-white wire. I was wondering what this is. So here's the part that plugs in the trans. You got your black. Goes to a thermal feed switch. You see the white black on the other end. This book here is calling it a thermal delay switch. Looks like this guy here loops back up to that time delay relay. I think I got enough info where I could actually reproduce the emissions on this car and the transmission controlled spark and all that good stuff. Not sure if it's worth it, but it'd be an interesting challenge. I think I'm going to finish off this makeshift electric choke wire. I'm going to leave that hooked up for the time being. I was looking at this connector here. I thought it was overlapping heat shrink, but I don't know what the hell this is. And only half the strands are in there. This end's already split. I'm just going to rework what they got there. I got that end all soldered up. Piece of heat shrink on it like this. Put an oversized piece on it to protect everything but the very end. There you have it. But to make a long story short, I'll come back here and hit this. And I think I read somewhere that this is a soldered connection, so hopefully this entire deal doesn't come undone when I attempt to resolder this wire on there. But this looks like a pretty good mechanical connection. So, see how weak that was. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to overlap it, see if I can get it to lay on there with some solder. Alright, to anybody watching this, bad idea. I had to put a ton of heat in there, get all these wires hot, and it didn't take worth the shit. Trying to think of how else I could connect this cluster, but nothing's really coming up. And actually, it seems like it's on there pretty good. Let's toss some tape over it. Moving on, this brown-orange is supposed to have a fuse in it. No fuse, and it's quite a bit shorter than this other wire here, and they both go to that positive on the back of the alternator. You can see how much shorter that is there. Here's the alternator, and before it turns to black-orange, you see 30 amp inline fuse, and a chunk of 12 gauge black red. So I'm going to toss something in there for protection and make the end length the same as this guy here. If you recall, on the road trip I had taped this connector up because it looked like that. A little oversized. But this connector here is ridiculously oversized for this terminal. So I think I'll start with this connector and try and get a properly sized fitting on there, and then match a fuse up to this one for that. Looks like a made in the USA fuse holder. Just happen to have it in my toolbox. I got these about the same length now. I'm onto the clip that plugs into the alternator. And this thing looks terrible. So the brown wire just broke right off here. It was barely held on there by a couple strands. And these wires are pretty beat up. Been twisted around so many times through the years. I just got one of these extension jobs. Clip off this end here that I'm not going to use. Clicks into the alternator real nice. Nice positive fit. I'm going to replace as much of these wires as I can with this job. The only downfall is the original field wire was brown, and the one on here is black. I'm putting small heat shrink on the end of all the wires I'm not using, so there's no chance of them shorting out. This wire here goes to the temperature sending unit. It's pretty beat up. The wire is kind of beat farther upstream too. I'm going to replace that wire with a new green wire. Looks like I have about the same shade there. And I got a connector kit from Ames. What I'm noticing on this clip, it doesn't have the cutout on it. Unlike this guy, so I'll use this original piece of plastic with the new spade connector. I tossed a piece of tape on the wire so I can keep the finished length of the new wire the same. There's a little barb on these clips that keeps them in those plastic housings. This is all pretty basic stuff, but if you've never done it before, just give you an idea how it works. There was only one strand holding that connector on there. Got the connector cleaned up as good as I'm going to get it. See if we can get it to snap in here. So test fit this thing. Somebody tapped off this wire here. I'm going to try to get this connector off of here. I had to put a little bit of tape around it to get this size heat shrink to stay. The back of this clip has been pushed in. I'm just going to pry it back out so it'll catch when I put it back in that plastic piece. There you have it, the wiring harness as I'm going to put it back in. I'll probably need some adjustments here and there to make it fit pretty good, but this wire here, the guy had run into a wide open throttle light. It just momentarily blink on when you floor the car. Here's a look at it, LED inside the air cleaner so you could see it in the shaker. The way it was wired was kind of a joke. I think I know where the other end of this goes. Probably tough to see this, but here's the gas pedal. That switch right there is a wide open throttle switch. You kick down the trans. And I'm thinking this blue wire here is the other end of that. Let's find out. It was the other end of it. And I'm going to work on getting this connector off here. I'm going to work at getting this harness back in the car now. Alright, try to plug the headlight harness back into the engine harness. Wasn't too bad. There are some diagrams in the service manual how that wiring harness is supposed to go. I'll put the final HEI connector for the tach and the power on after the engine's in, so I know exactly how long it needs to be. I can just take this end of that tach fuse out. Should be pretty easy to work with. That's what I came up with so far. I have to train it in some more and stuff once the engine's in.